It was a cold day in the Midwest when Dave and I got on a plane to head to the beautiful United Kingdom. After tasting the local delicacies, we headed off with Dave quickly navigating how to drive on the wrong side of the road. England is full of quaint farms filled with sheep and beautiful ancient churches, but that was not why we were coming. Our first stop was to meet up with our friend Joe Coombs and chat with him about his love of Browne pedals. Alright, how did you first discover Browne amplification pedals?
Well, I was making... Oh, that's not a question for me. So, Joe, how did you first discover Browne pedals?
I had seen that you'd started posting a little bit on Instagram, basically. We then started having a bit of a conversation because I was using a couple of pedals that were in the sort of ballpark of what you were trying to capture.
I think I saw your board, and I saw you with an ODR1 and a Morning Glory, and
That's
I was
right.
like, hey, I know what's right up your alley.
You have the medicine for, for what I needed. And so we just got talking, didn't we? And all the stuff that you had done with the circuits was kind of exactly what I was wanting. But at that time, there wasn't really anything doing that, or at least in one box the way that you had done it.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of changed the game ever since, really, because they just work so well together, don't they? And I think as well in the order that you've done them in, because I know there's been a lot of talk about why you didn't put a switch on there to change the order and all that stuff, but there's a beauty in how they stack together, and they stay very clear. They never become over compressed, which is quite an achievement for usually two overdrive circuits. For me, what sounded different is a lot of dual overdrives. Sometimes when you stack them both together and they've got a bit of gain, they start sounding more pedally. Whereas what you've done is when you stack them, they just seem to open up and they bloom more like when an amp compresses and starts giving you the stuff that you want it to, rather than it sounding, there's nothing artificial sounding in it. It feels very organic and very natural under the fingers.
I love that, because whenever somebody describes to me that something does what my whole, what I wanted it to do, it's like, oh man, we won, because you got a tool that did what you wanted it to do, and that was the intention from the beginning, is like, how can I make something that will do this?
Exactly.
And to make something that feels organic and real. I mean, amp-like. I hate saying amp-like because, it's so overused, but something that feels like the way that it's supposed to. How about that? It feels right.
It just feels like you're stacking, and again, another thing that's become more of a buzzword, but like it feels like you're stepping on the next channel in your amp without, because for me, I'm usually playing clean single channel amps. So to then have something that feels like the amp is just giving you more, rather than I'm completely changing the sound. It's more, I'm adding something to it that's just improving the thing I've already got. And also, with those two circuits, they've really become the sort of beginning of end of the sounds that I search for when I'm playing a live gig, because the blue side is just perfect for having a really dynamic, clean sound. It's my always on when I'm doing more cleaner things. That still, when I dig in, gives me a little bit of that sweet compression and all that stuff. But then the green side, when I want to have a bit more of that rhythm grit, so you can dig in and it really feels like the amp is giving something back to you. But at the same time, it's also, the green side is incredibly dynamic as well. Both sides seem to be very tuned in to your picking attack. And I really notice when I'm playing it that if I just lighten up my touch that bit, I don't even need to touch my volume control to get it cleaner. I just need to lighten up my touch. And being aware of that, I think actually has more of a deeper meaning because you sort of notice more of your own playing and start to become more aware of, oh, actually, if I do lighten up my touch, I can get a completely different sound without even touching anything. Yeah. I'm not turning on another pedal or rolling off my volume. I'm just literally easing up my dynamics, and dynamics are a big thing for me. So to play a pedal that encapsulates that is a big deal.
I mean, dynamics are, I know they're not everything, but they're almost everything to me. I mean, you mentioned Mark Knopfler earlier. He's one of my favorites, and I love that he plays with, I mean, I mostly these days play with fingers because, I mean, there's some things you can't do without a pick. So it's not that I don't play with a pick, but most of the time, if I pick up a guitar, I'm just playing it with my fingers, and there's just so much dynamics that you get there. And if something doesn't have dynamics, if you lighten up your touch and you get the same sound out of it, I mean, if you got a great compressor on, obviously it's gonna do that to a sense. But that's what makes it feel less like a pedal and more like, or as we were saying, makes it feel right. Makes it feel correct. That like when you lighten up, it lightens up.
Yeah.
When you push on the gas, it goes faster. Like that's how I want it to feel.
In the like traditional old school way of doing things with, you know, plugging guitars straight into cranked up valve amps.
Right.
We've become used to a certain level of responsiveness, and knowing that immediately with us changing something in our style of playing, the guitar and the amp is going to react to that.
Right.
So when you're putting something in between you and the amp, you really want it to be sort of exaggerating that relationship rather than putting up a barrier between it.
Right. That's huge, especially now that we often don't get a chance to have a Tweed Fender or an AC30 or a Marshall that's turned up even halfway to where it's beginning to do what it does. It's starting to get chewy and compress and break up when you hit it hard. Like most of the time in a live situation, we're not getting to do that anymore.
No.
So making circuits that will act like that is, you know, the goal for me.
For sure. And I remember right at the start, like when you and Adam were talking about it and how he wanted the situation to be, he could have this pedal and he could plug into any backline amp and he know that he would be okay because he had this on his board, so it would always sound in his head exactly right. And that's how it's become for me, like flying into different situations, you're not knowing what you're going to get. And even to an extent with my own amps, going into different rooms, different size rooms and different volume expectations from sound engineers, there can be times where I can push it a bit more and I can really feel it on stage. And there's other times where it almost has to be not inaudible, but you know, not
barely
offensive
cracked.
to anybody on the front row, you know. And so I think it's important to have something that feels good at any level as well.
Adam has referred several times to his secret setting. Like if he showed up and there was a really bad sounding amp, he would turn the green side on, turn the gain down all the way, bring the level up to where he wanted, and turn the tone up, you know, past noon, and leave the green side on all the time because it feels like an amp that's starting to compress. Like if you have a really bad, really thin, misbiased amp, or he tells a really funny story of showing up to some tiny little, you know, he had asked for, you know, one of 3 different things, and there was some little tiny pink. It's almost a joke when he tells this story, but you know, if you can make almost anything sound good, I don't know, problem solving is a big deal on gigs because you have to show up and deliver.
You do.
It doesn't matter whether the room sounds bad or the you know, the engineer is saying, "Can you turn that down?" And you're like, "It's already at 1. If I turn it down anymore, it doesn't make any sound."
I can already hear the strings on my guitar over the sound of my amp. You know, I'm already doing as much as I
don't need any monitors.
Humanly can. No, I've gotten used to having to turn my amp 180 degrees now.
Yes.
To try and save front house and the front row as much as I can. You know, so we've had to become a lot more used to, as guitar players and musicians in general, in not having the barrier off think this is my sound.
Right.
You know, that if we want to get the best show for you know, the artist who I'm working with or for the audience, then we have to work together. Which is hugely important. And it's incredibly important.
Yeah,
it's
and
everything.
if you lose sight of that, that's a place we've tried to get away from as we grow and become more mature as musicians. The audience and the artist is far more important than how I feel about my guitar solo in song number 3. Even though that guitar solo is...
Yeah. Yeah. That you're part of a much bigger thing.
Yes.
And the amount of time you get to the end of a gig and you think, oh, I didn't really quite hit it that night. And then everybody was like, oh yeah, it was a great show. And it's that you're a part of a big machine that is making this thing work. You know, your part that you play is a part of it. What the part the engineer is playing, the monitor engineer, the bass player, everybody is playing an equal part to make the show sound as best as it can do. Sometimes that has to come with certain compromises, but knowing at the core of it that I'm going to have my sound, regardless of what level I'm going to have to be playing at, is a big deal. You know, and getting it feeling right under the fingers, and that, you know, the compression, you know, because like in the green side, there's like a level of compression that's so sweet and it just really evens out. You know, like I've talked to you about how it's the pedal that I can just put on with any guitar and it just takes it and makes it sound like that guitar. It's not adding a whole bunch of information to that guitar that didn't need to be there. Yeah. It's just, you know, I can leave a side on and plug in 4 different guitars and all of them are going to sound great, but at the core of it, they're going to sound like that guitar. They're not going to sound like a cookie cutter version that I've forced this guitar to be because this pedal's doing that certain thing. It's not that sort of thing, which is very inspiring. So then, let's get to the big unveiling. Okay. And this happens to be in a very beautiful copper finish with the beautiful soft-latching foot switches. Yep. Which is very cool. So, this is my main overdrive, and the way I tend to use it is when I've got like a set of, because I tend to do mostly country Americana type things. There's a lot of stuff that could be, you know, sort of nice rootsy rhythm, sort of mild gain type stuff. Yeah. With a multitude of different, you know, 335, my Iverson guitars, my Dakota and Hurricane and Telecaster, all of that stuff. And the green side is my go-to for the mid-gain rhythm thing, that then I'll push that and that'll get the solo tone. Right. But for me, what that has is, first of all, the low end in it is just right to work with all those different guitars. You know, there's nothing too boomy about it, but there's enough there so that when you plug in a Strat or you plug in a Tele, it's always going to feel full in the right way. And I think there's something to do with the low mids as well. I think in that style of circuit and the way that you've tweaked it, it just adds the right amount of sort of oomph to every guitar that you use it with, which is why it's become my favourite for me. And I tend to run the sort of tone to match wherever my amp is sort of sitting at, which, like, I like a present tone where I've got the articulation to dig in. So I'll sometimes run the tone around, you know, like sort of 1-2 o'clock usually, and then the volume sort of just past, sort of just on unity, sort of around between 12 and 1, and then the gain is around between 10 and 11 o'clock usually. And for me, I just step on that, and if I play lighter, it feels very even, and but still really nice under the fingers. And then when I dig in, then it starts to give the really lovely sweet overdrive that I just associate with that side of the protein.
Now, would that be with the blue side on most of the time?
That would usually be without it. So I tend to use the green side just on its own.
All right.
And then sometimes when I play guitar solo, I'll hit the blue side in to be the solo. So and because it's post, you get more output.
Absolutely.
Less about gain, but more about like the sort of the output and how this side can shape the sound slightly. Which I think is another reason why when you stack them both, it never gets too compressed or it never caves in on itself, because there's a lot of headroom in this, isn't there? And you did that with the blue side as well, didn't you? There's a lot more volume on tap on the blue side than there is in its predecessor or sort of equals. And then, so this is why I love the green side. It's just for me, it's just a brilliant leave on for that mid-gain rhythm tone that I love for that rootsy, bluesy country kind of stuff. And then the blue side is my always on for when I'm doing stuff that's basically a straight, clean tone.
Right.
But I really feel there's like this sort of solidness with the blue side that with both these sides, they feel ampy because I feel when I play it, there's weight. There's weight to every note. And bloom and all these words, but kind of perfectly reflect how it feels when you're playing.
For sure.
Playing this, and this is always just through a crystal clean amp.
Right.
And we talked earlier about having the confidence of running this through any amp that you're thrown with, and you'll still get the sound that you want.
Right.
Because oftentimes I'm not in situations where I can get an amp to edge a breakup.
Right.
And then have a pedal that perfectly meshes with the preamp gain. So, for me, having something that can take a clean amp and really take it to a beautiful place is much more valuable to me.
Yeah.
Because as long as I can get a sound that's clean, this will handle everything else. And for songs that I'm just needing a clean tone, I'll often use the blue side to do that, so that there is still a little bit of, it's doing that edge of breakup thing more. So whereas this is like your, the tone of your amp when you've got it cranked up, and it's doing that really sweet compression, and you've got all the harmonics that are being created by that. This is doing the more of the thing when you're just slightly pushing the amp. And I tend to just run this with basically everything at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
The tone maybe dip, maybe just a bit below if I'm using single coils with it a bit more.
Right.
But pretty much everything at 12 o'clock just works great. And then I can either stack them both together or use them individually, and they do the sounds that I need to, and they perfectly encompass the sort of opposite ends of the gain structure that I need them to do,
Awesome.
So yeah.
That's fantastic.
No, it's great. It's great. But I get asked a lot of questions about the sort of different settings that I use, and it's pretty much these settings for every gig, because it just works with the types of clean amps that I use and the types of guitars I use. It's just this just blends into the character of each guitar.
I love what you talked about using the green side on its own as kind of more of a rootsy rock tone, and then using the blue side to boost that, which tends to be the opposite of how I use it, but is also, works great that way. So if you want more of a rock sound, you're using the green side and boosting with the blue, but if you want the more of a clean sound, you're using the blue side and then boosting it with the green, which is where I tend to end up more often than not playing live, but I love that both work.
They do.
It's really fun that you're using it the other way.
Yeah.
That would definitely is a great solo boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the EQ that is in the green side, I've just found to work perfectly live. So there is just the right amount of treble in there that is needed to cut, so that it feels, there's all the transients are there, but it's never ice picky or anything. And the mid range is really spot on in this compared to some others that I've used in this similar vein, where you still need to poke out in a mix.
Right.
And sometimes more volume doesn't necessarily get you there. It's about frequencies.
Right.
But I also want frequencies that feel right to my ears, and nothing too crazy pronounced or anything.
Right.
It just seems to really makes the difference when I'm on a live gig and I'm sound checking, and it's the difference between me putting this on and with a nice amp and a couple nice guitars, and the engineer just puts the fader up on the mic and says, "Cool,
Yeah.
we're done here." And that's the kind of greatest compliment, I think, in a way, in terms of having something that you feel really comfortable in live and you can express yourself in, but also is translating to the front of house as well.
Yeah.
And not too much, not too much bass. There's definitely low end in this, but it's the right kind of low end. It's not the rumbly low end.
Right.
And like we mentioned about low mids and stuff earlier, which I think is the low mids with guitars. Mid range is everything.
Yes.
But the low mids can really help give you some of that width that you want,
right,
without getting in the way of the bass player or the bass drum.
Right.
So we gotta live in our lane.
Right.
But we gotta feel comfortable living in our lane as well, and it be a pleasant experience for people to listen to. So
yeah, that's fantastic.
So yeah,
thank you.
Not at all. Thank you for making it.
You're welcome.
But quickly we were back on the road, headed to Guildford, where lies the wonderful music store called Anderton's. What a great selection they have, with wonderful stuff, but we could not dilly-dally too long, for we had an appointment with Destiny, and more importantly, Captain Anderton himself. With Danish Pete behind the scenes, we enjoyed a wonderful British time, and all too quickly it was time to leave. To see the whole video, head on over to Anderton's YouTube page. Our time was brief, and we were sad to depart. So until next time, thanks for the memories, England.